What happens when the world's greatest boxer realizes that true power might not come from the fist, but from water? Los Angeles, September 15, 1972, Friday night, 9:47 p.m. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel's private gymnasium reeks of leather and ambition. Muhammad Ali, three-time world heavyweight champion, stands frozen in the center of the ring, watching a 135-pound Chinese-American demonstrate something impossible. Muhammad Ali had conquered everything boxing could offer. At 30 years old, he'd already transcended sport to become a cultural phenomenon. The Louisville Lip, they called him. Though his mouth had spoken truths that shook America's foundations, he'd refused Vietnam, sacrificed millions, and returned triumphant. His fists had felled Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, and Jerry Quarry. Physics bent to his will, 220 pounds moving like 150, dancing where others plodded, floating where giants sank. But tonight, something disturbed his universe. The invitation had come through unusual channels. Not his manager, not his promoter, but through Jun Rhee, the Korean martial artist who'd been teaching Ali footwork techniques. "There's someone you need to meet," Rhee had said, his usually composed face animated with something approaching reverence. "Bruce Lee isn't just a martial artist, he's different." Ali had laughed. "Different, brother. I've faced different. Different is what I eat for breakfast." The Beverly Wilshire's basement gymnasium had been closed to the public. Ted Ashley, Warner Brothers executive, had arranged it personally. The Hollywood elite whispered about this meeting for weeks. When Ali arrived, his entourage of 6 seemed to fill the space, until you noticed the slight figure warming up in the corner, moving through forms that seemed to defy joint mechanics. Bruce Lee, at 5'7" and 135 pounds, looked like Ali's shadow might swallow him whole. Yet something in his movement commanded attention, not aggression, but absolute presence. His warm-up wasn't preparation, it was philosophy in motion. "Mr. Ali," Lee approached, extending his hand. His grip, Ali would later note, felt like iron wrapped in silk. "I've studied your fights, your movement against Cleveland Williams, poetry." Ali, never one to miss verbal sparring, grinned. "Poetry, that's what I've been telling everyone, but they just see the punches. They see what they're trained to see," Lee responded. "Most people watch boxing, I watch the space between movements. You don't defeat opponents, you defeat their expectations." The gymnasium held 23 witnesses that night. Among them, Sterling Silliphant, screenwriter, Dan Inosanto, Lee's protege, James Coburn, actor and Lee's student, Mike Stone, karate champion, and Angelo Dundee, Ali's trainer, who'd initially protested this meeting. What's he gonna learn from a movie star? Dundee had grumbled. He'd stopped grumbling within minutes. Lee had requested a specific setup. Not a ring, rings create illusions, he'd said, but open space, hanging bags at various heights, a wooden dummy, speed bags, and something unusual, bowls of water placed strategically around the floor. "What's with the water?" Ali asked, genuinely curious now. "Patience," Lee smiled. "First show me your jab." Ali's eyebrows rose. Nobody asked Muhammad Ali to demonstrate the basics. But something in Lee's tone, respectful yet assured, made him comply. He threw a jab that had dropped champions. Fast, straight, perfect, beautiful, Lee nodded. "Now watch." He positioned himself differently. "Your jab travels 18 inches, mine." He demonstrated, his fist somehow already at the target. 6 inches, same power. "Impossible," Dundee interjected from ringside. "Define impossible," Lee replied, never breaking eye contact with Ali. "Is it impossible, or have we simply agreed to certain limitations?" What followed challenged every assumption in that room about combat. Lee didn't move like a fighter. He moved like water finding cracks in stone. He demonstrated his famous 1-inch punch on a volunteer. Mike Stone, himself a championship fighter, was driven backward into crash pads from a punch that traveled the width of a thumb. Ali watched, his usual commentary silenced. His eyes, those same eyes that could read an opponent's intentions before they knew them themselves, tracked Lee's movement with growing fascination. "Your turn," Lee said simply. "My turn for what?" "To hit me." The room fell silent. James Coburn later described it. You could hear fabric rustling. Everyone stopped breathing. Ali looked at Dundee, who shrugged. At 220 pounds versus Lee's 135, with reach advantage measured in feet not inches, this seemed absurd. "I don't hit smaller men for demonstrations," Ali said diplomatically. "You won't hit me anyway," Lee responded, matter of fact rather than boastful. "But try, half speed, if you're concerned." What happened next redefined half speed for everyone present. Ali threw a combination, jab, cross, hook, that would have troubled any heavyweight alive. Lee didn't dodge, he dissolved. Where Ali's fist traveled, Lee had already vacated. Not through superior speed, but through reading intention before it became action. Again, Lee instructed. Faster. Ali complied. The results remained identical. Lee seemed to exist in the spaces between Ali's punches, moving not away but through, like smoke through fingers. "Stop," Lee said after 2 minutes that felt like 20. Ali, breathing harder than expected, nodded. "You're fighting me. That's the error. You cannot fight water." He walked to one of the water bowls, dipped his fingers. "Strike water, it yields." Grab water, it escapes. But water, he flicked droplets that caught the gymnasium lights, can penetrate stone given time. That's pretty, but this ain't poetry class, Ollie countered, though his tone lacked its usual sting. Isn't it? Lee smiled. You write poems with your fists. I'm simply suggesting a different verse structure. May I touch you? Ollie nodded, curious. Lee placed one hand on Ollie's massive bicep, the other on his hip. You generate power here, touching the arm. Delivered through here, indicating the fist. Linear, powerful, but limited by distance, telegraphed by necessity. He stepped back, assumed a stance that seemed impossibly relaxed. I generate power here, touching his own hip, spiraling through here, running his hand up his torso, expressed here, extending his arm. Not linear, circular, not telegraphed, already arrived. Show me on the bag, Ollie challenged. Lee approached a heavy bag that must have weighed more than he did. Without apparent wind-up, without the body mechanics boxing demanded, he struck. The bag didn't just move, it folded around his fist and jumped on its chain. Sterling Siliphant, watching from the sidelines, later wrote, I've seen Ollie hit bags. They swing. When Bruce hit that bag, it looked like it was trying to escape. Your homework, Lee said, returning to the water bowls. Put your fist in the water. Ollie, now fully engaged in this strange lesson, immersed his massive fist. Water displaced, sloshed over the edges. Now try to grab it, Lee instructed. Ollie's fingers closed on nothing. Water escaped through every gap. Now watch. Lee placed his own hand in a different bowl, moving it slowly, creating a whirlpool that followed his motion. The water didn't escape, it danced with him. You box like you grab water, with force, with intention to dominate. But water doesn't respond to domination, it responds to harmony. Your opponents are water, Muhammad. Stop trying to grab them, learn to guide them. Pretty philosophy, Ollie said, withdrawing his dripping hand. But Fraser ain't water. Fraser's a truck. Everything is water at different temperatures, Lee responded. Ice seems solid until heat is applied. Steam seems insubstantial until it powers locomotives. Fraser isn't a truck, he's ice. Apply the right energy, and he becomes fluid. Dan Inosanto, Lee's senior student, noticed Ollie's expression change. The showman's mask slipped, revealing genuine intellectual curiosity. All right, Professor, Ollie said, a new respect coloring the word. You talk pretty, but can you take a punch? The room tensed. This was beyond demonstration now. This was Ollie's pride reasserting itself. Lee considered. Define take a punch. Stand there and absorb it. No, that's not martial arts. That's masochism. But receive your energy and return it. Perhaps, though I'd prefer to show you something else. I'm listening. Hit the wooden dummy. Lee indicated the Wing Chun training apparatus. Full power. Ollie approached the wooden dummy with its protruding arms and legs. He threw a right cross that would have decapitated most opponents. The dummy shuddered, its base scraping concrete despite being weighted with sand. Impressive, Lee nodded. 200 pounds of force, perhaps more. Now observe. Lee approached the same dummy. What followed wasn't a punch in any conventional sense. He touched the dummy. That's what it looked like. Just a touch. But the entire apparatus lifted off the ground and crashed backward. How? Ollie's question came out as a whisper. You hit the dummy. I hit through the dummy. Into the ground beneath. Into the space behind. You ended at the surface. I began at the destination. Your power travels, mine arrives. Mike Stone, himself a full-contact champion, later testified, I'd seen Bruce do impossible things. But that night, watching Ollie's face as his understanding of combat crumbled and reformed, that was the real knockout. Lee pulled out a blindfold. May I? Ollie, now fully committed to this strange education, allowed Lee to blindfold him. Throw a punch when you feel my touch, Lee instructed. Standing in darkness, Ollie waited. A feather touch on his shoulder. He spun, jabbing at air. A tap on his hip. He pivoted, hooking at nothing. Each time, Lee had already moved. Not quickly but appropriately, like a dance partner who knew the steps before the music played. Frustrating, isn't it? Lee's voice came from somewhere Ollie hadn't expected. You're fighting your assumptions about where I should be, not where I am. Remove the blindfold. Ollie did, blinking in the light. So what? You're faster than me. No, I'm more present than you. You fight the last second, or the next second. I fight this second. Only this second exists. Past and future are illusions that slow you down. Lee moved to the speed bag, but instead of the rhythmic percussion boxers favored, he created complex polyrhythms, his fists blurring not with speed, but with efficiency. Boxing teaches patterns, he explained while maintaining the impossible rhythm. Jab, cross, hook, uppercut, combinations. But patterns create expectations, and expectations create openings. What if instead of patterns, you created jazz? Jazz. Ollie laughed, the first genuine laugh since the demonstration began. You know jazz. Improvisation is built on understanding. Structure without restriction. Freedom within form. Your boxing is classical music. Beautiful, powerful, but predictable to those who know the score. What if it became improvisation? As the clock neared midnight, the atmosphere had transformed. What began as skepticism had evolved into something approaching reverence. Ollie, who'd spent a lifetime being the teacher, found himself genuinely student-like for perhaps the first time since childhood. One more demonstration, Lee proposed. Not of technique, but of principle. Stand here. He positioned Ollie in the center of the space. Close your eyes. Don't open them until I tell you. And whatever you feel, don't move. Ali, trusting now where hours ago he'd doubted, closed his eyes. Those watching described what happened next differently, filtered through their own understanding. Coburn saw meditation in motion. Inosanto saw the culmination of 20 years training. Dundee saw something that would change how he trained fighters forever. Lee began moving around Ali, never touching him but creating air currents with his movements. Witnesses said it looked like Lee was sculpting space itself, his hands and body creating invisible pressures that seemed to affect Ali despite the lack of contact. Feel that? Lee's voice was soft. That's intention without action, energy without contact. In Chinese we call it qi, but the word doesn't matter. What matters is that combat exists before contact. The fight happens in the space between us, not at the point of impact. Ali's face, eyes still closed, showed a progression of emotions, confusion, recognition, then something approaching enlightenment. Open your eyes. When Ali did, Lee was standing exactly where he'd started, as if he'd never moved at all. Did you? Ali began. Move. Constantly. Touch you. Never. Affect you. What do you think? Ali's hand went to his arm where he'd felt the strongest presence. No mark, no contact, but the sensation remained. As the evening wound down, the crowd of witnesses had grown quiet, processing what they'd seen. This wasn't about East versus West, Kung Fu versus boxing. This was about expanding the definition of what combat could be. Lee and Ali sat on the canvas-covered floor, two warriors from different worlds finding common ground in their dedication to perfection. You know what troubles me? Ali said finally. I've built my life on being the greatest. But tonight, you've shown me I've been playing checkers while you're playing chess. No, while you're playing some game that doesn't even have a board. You are the greatest. Lee responded without flattery. At what you do, no one comes close. I couldn't last 30 seconds in your world. But there are many worlds, Muhammad. I'm simply showing you one door to one world. What you do with that knowledge, that's what makes greatness. Could you beat me? Ali asked directly. In a real fight. Lee considered the question seriously. Define real fight. In a boxing ring, under boxing rules, you'd destroy me. On the street, no rules, I'd have advantages. But the real answer? The question itself is flawed. It assumes fighting is about beating someone. Sometimes the greatest victory is not fighting at all. That sounds like cowardice dressed up pretty. Ali challenged, but gently. Does it? You refused to fight in Vietnam. Was that cowardice? Ali's eyes sharpened. That was principle. Exactly. And my principle is this. Fighting is the last resort of the uncreative mind. I study combat to understand peace. I perfect violence to achieve gentleness. Paradox is the highest truth. As the gathering broke up past midnight, each witness carried away something different. Dundee immediately began incorporating Lee's distance concepts into Ali's training. Coburn deepened his study of martial arts philosophy. Silliphant started writing what would become Circle of Iron, inspired by the evening's demonstrations. But the most profound impact was on Ali himself. Before I go, Ali said, as Lee walked him to the door, teach me one thing I can use tomorrow. Lee smiled. You want a technique? I don't know what I want. Something to remind me this wasn't a dream. Lee positioned Ali's hands. Make a fist. Good. Now relax it. Not completely. Maintain structure without tension. Feel that. That's the beginning. Power without force. Intention without telegraphing. Practice that until it becomes natural, and everything else follows. They shook hands at the door, two legends acknowledging mutual respect. Will I see you again? Ali asked. You'll see me every time you flow instead of force. Lee replied. Every time you arrive instead of traveling. Every time you are water instead of rock. In the weeks that followed, those who trained with Ali noticed subtle changes. His footwork, always exceptional, became even more fluid. His combinations lost their predictability, while maintaining their power. He began talking about being water in interviews, puzzling sports writers, who expected his usual poetic boasts. The Foreman fight was still 2 years away, but seeds planted that night in Beverly Hills would bloom in Kinshasa. The rope-a-dope strategy, absorbing punishment while expending minimal energy, turning an opponent's strength against him, bore Lee's philosophical fingerprints. Ali didn't just defeat Foreman, he made Foreman defeat himself, a pure expression of Lee's principles. Lee, for his part, began incorporating more of Ali's rhythmic movement into his own teaching. Students noticed a new fluidity in his demonstrations, a dance-like quality that hadn't been there before. The warrior philosopher had learned from the boxer poet just as much as he'd taught. When Lee died suddenly in July 1973, Ali was one of the first to call Linda Lee with condolences. What he said to her remains private, but she later shared that he'd spoken about water and philosophy rather than death and loss. 11 years later, suffering from Parkinson's disease that had begun to slow his magnificent body, Ali gave an interview to a martial arts magazine. Asked about his greatest influences, he mentioned the obvious names, Sugar Ray Robinson, Jack Johnson, and Joe Louis. Then he paused. But there was this one night in LA. Bruce Lee taught me something. Not about fighting. I knew fighting. He taught me about not fighting. About being water when everyone expects you to be stone. That night changed things. I'm still figuring it out. The interviewer pressed for details. Ali, uncharacteristically subdued, simply said, some lessons are too big for words. Bruce understood that. He taught with his whole being, not just his mouth or his fists. That's rare. That's why he's immortal.
Those who witnessed that night in Beverly Hills carry the memory like a secret treasure. In an age before smartphones and social media, when private moments could remain private, two of the greatest martial artists of any generation met, not to fight, but to explore the spaces between fighting. They discovered that true mastery isn't about defeating others, it's about transcending the need for defeat altogether. In that basement gymnasium, surrounded by the tools of combat, they found something beyond combat: understanding. Water doesn't fight rock, it simply flows around, over, through, until the rock becomes sand, becomes part of the stream itself. That night, Muhammad Ali, the Louisville Lip, the greatest, became water for perhaps the first time in his life. And Bruce Lee, the Little Dragon, showed that true power has nothing to do with size, that philosophy and physics are the same truth viewed from different angles. The heavy bags hang still now in that Beverly Hills gymnasium, renovated beyond recognition. But somewhere in the space between memory and legend, two warriors continue their dance, one like a butterfly, one like water, both teaching us that the greatest fights are the ones that never happen, that the mightiest victories leave no losers, only students. What do you do when someone shows you that everything you knew about power was only half the truth? If you're Muhammad Ali, you become water. And if you're fortunate enough to witness such a transformation, you understand that some moments transcend sport, transcend culture, transcend even the men who create them. They become immortal, like water, like butterflies, like the space between heartbeats where truth lives, waiting for those brave enough to find it.